This is part 4 of Astronomy versus Astrology, and we're going to come back to constellations and bring together the things that we've learned in the previous 3 parts. So the first thing that we need to talk about is the idea of constellation boundaries. So remember, we talked about how the constellations that we usually think about and the ones that we use in science are just one set of constellations, and every culture has their own set of constellations. And they're usually historical. They're usually things that have to do with the stories we tell to remember where things are. But because we want to be able to define where things are in space, back in 1930, the International Astronomical Union adopted some constellation boundaries. So you can think of this as being, we want to have names for areas of sky. It's a little bit like, the states have boundaries, and if you're within those boundaries, you're in that state. And if you cross those boundaries, you move into a different state. So here in this picture, we've got the Earth in the middle. If we look over the other side, we can see Orion here. Here's Taurus, here's Gemini. If we look on this side, we're seeing it backwards, but this is Hercules, Corona Borealis, and Lyra. But basically, if I was a star in this section, I would be a star in Lyra. If I was a star in this section, I'd be a star in Hercules. So it has nothing to do with mythologies or anything. It's just a convenient way of describing where things are in the sky. And there was effort was made, because astronomy is such an ancient subject and there's a lot of data out there, to keep the boundaries so that there wasn't too much confusion with things ending up in a different constellation than when they were last observed. So you've got a whole bunch of constellations that have funny shapes, and we'll see that as we go along. So like I said, they don't mean anything beyond, it's a patch of sky that we're going to call Hercules or Cygnus or Draco. It's a way of describing that patch of sky. And then we can say, oh, I want to find this comet. Where is it? Oh, you need to look in the constellation Hydra, or you need to look in Canis Major, or wherever it is. Or, if it's a planet, oh yeah, it's in Leo right now. So this is just taking in a little less confusing look, because that globe version is a little bit difficult to concentrate on. So here we've got Orion again. You can see the boundary's been made to make it so that it gets all of the arm holding of the club and all of that. Here we've got Canis Major. Here we've got Monoceros. And you can see here that if we just join the lines, actually there's some stars here that you might think of historically as being Monoceros, but actually would end up in Orion. And so there are some stars that end up with names that identify them with more than one constellation. But again, just remember that all that matters here is if it's a star inside of this boundary, it's considered to be in Orion. It has no relationship, or not necessarily any relationship, to the other stars in the constellation. Sticking with Orion, here I've got a more detailed version. Here you can see Gemini, Taurus, and you can see here that, there are stars very close to the boundaries. So here you can see there's one actually on the boundary. So is that in Orion or is it in Taurus? These are boundaries that are meant to make it easier for us to describe where things are. So here I've got Gemini. You can see here's Taurus, here's Orion, here's Monoceros, here's Canis Minor. So we've been looking at all of these the last few slides. And this is the classic stars of Gemini, but everything that's inside of this yellow boundary is considered to be in Gemini. Likewise, here I'm looking at, this is Aquarius. So everything inside of this yellow boundary is in Aquarius, but I can see Pisces here, Pegasus up here. And so this helps us to see where things are. In this case, the red line here is actually showing you the ecliptic. This is where the sun goes as it looks like it moves across the sky. So again, this is more constellation boundaries. Here is the constellation section that is where the ecliptic is. Remember, we've got Gemini, Cancer, Leo, Virgo, Libra. These zodiac signs define the ecliptic. So the sun would be here. You would never find the sun up in Corona Borealis or in Corvus or sextans. So we've got this region is where the sun can be, and actually all of the planets too. And then there are all these other constellations, but they are not where you will find planets or the sun. The issue with the boundaries is that the zodiac constellations, they're really about timekeeping. So here I want you to consider that if you think about Aquarius, Aquarius is the water bringer, and this coincides with the thaw in Southern Europe. So you've got February, the winter is ending, the spring is coming, and the water, everything is melting, so you've got water, the water bringer. If we go around to, say, Aries, Aries is a fertility symbol, and it's about lambs being born and plants starting to grow. That's, again, another spring thing. Jump forward to here, we've got Virgo is the queen of the harvest. This is about being able to harvest. So these constellations are about telling a story of what happens during the year. It's about timekeeping. But you can also see that these are all different sizes. So you can see that Taurus and Gemini seem to be pretty close together. Cancer seems to have a big section of the sky, but you might not have the sun in a given constellation for exactly 30 days. So although we think of it as being Gemini for 30 days, and then Cancer for 30 days, and then Leo, that's not how it was originally set up. And when we start to consider that we want to put boundaries on these things, now where the boundaries are is going to mess up which constellation the sun is in at which time of year. But we also have an interloper. Ophiuchus is another constellation that wasn't originally considered to be a constellation where you could see the sun, but once we put in boundaries, the boundaries were such that you could actually see the sun within the constellation Ophiuchus. So just to kind of show this in a little more detail, here's the ground, the horizon, here's Scorpio, here's Sagittarius, here's Ophiuchus, and the sun's path is going to take it from Scorpio to Sagittarius, but it's going to go through this little bit of Ophiuchus down here. And so because we defined Ophiuchus as coming all the way down here, instead of Sagittarius straight from Scorpio, the sun will appear in this constellation every time we go around the sun. And so that means that there's now a 13th zodiac constellation that nobody's ever heard of. But there's another complication. So when we talk about the idea that there is a way to tell the future by the constellations, remember I said that the stories are about timekeeping, about telling you when to plant, when the harvest is supposed to happen. It wasn't about predicting the future, except to be able to say, this is when I've got to do my harvesting. And so when we think about what the significance of these constellations are, that's their significance. It's not about what planet happens to be in that direction or anything like that. But there's another thing that we need to talk about, which has to do with precession. So we talked about precession in a previous section of this video series. And in precession, what happens is that as the Earth goes around the sun, we get back to spring equinox 20 minutes sooner than when we've gone all the way around. So let's start with the spring equinox. Spring equinox happens right about here. So the Earth is here in Aries, and the spring equinox is going to happen, and we're going to have the Earth goes all the way around. And the next spring equinox is going to happen just 20 minutes before it did the year before. And then it's going to go around again 20 minutes before and go around again. But all of those 20 minutes start to add up. So what happens is that over a century or a millennium, now what we have is that instead of being here when we get to the spring equinox, now the sun is going to look like it's in this direction. And so what we have is that instead of being in Aries, the sun is in Pisces. What you'll notice here is that we have June, we look at the sun, and the sun is actually in Taurus. Now, if like me, you are a Gemini and your birthday's in June, you'll be like, wait, what's going on? Well, actually, the Earth would have been in a different position. It would have been about where this arrow is about 4,000 years ago in June. But as it's gone round, it's not quite got back to the same point, and it's gone round. It's not got back to the same point. It's gone round. And so now, 40,000 years after we set up this system of using the zodiac to keep a calendar, now when we get to June, if we were to be able to see the stars behind the sun, it would be Taurus. So whatever constellation you think is where the sun was on the day you were born, or the thing that you read for your horoscopes, it's not where the sun was when you were born. It's probably the constellation before. Not only do we have Ophiuchus as an interloper, so for some people you'll have this constellation you've never heard of as where the sun is when you were born, but also it's not, the sun isn't exactly where you thought it was. So this is the new way of looking at it. So now, if your birthday is in January to February, it's Capricorn. You probably thought that you were Aquarius. Like say, my birthday's in June, makes my birthday actually in Taurus, not in Gemini, where I thought it was. And if your birthday is either the 30th of November or the first half of December, the sun was in Ophiuchus when you were born. So this is where the idea of astronomy and the idea of astrology just don't fit together anymore. And I'm going to leave it there and leave you with this URL, this link that you can use to go look up more about constellations.